Dr. Cheyenne Bryant is trolling us. And before we get distracted by the caps, the gown, and the wall of degrees, I want us to slow down and ask a better question. What are we actually debating here? Are we debating whether Dr. Bryant earned a particular credential? Are we debating whether a person needs a degree to have something meaningful to say? Are we debating whether the academy still deserves our trust? Or are we really debating how easily confidence, popularity, and visibility can be mistaken for expertise? Because those are four different conversations, and social media has thrown them all into one blender. So today, I want to move through this in four parts, right? First, the spectacle. Why would Dr. Bryant revive the controversy herself? Second, the personal. Why does this conversation make people with unconventional academic journeys feel exposed? And then third, the intellectual. How do we separate credentials, wisdom, evidence, and critical thinking? And then finally, the institutional. What happens when the public stops trusting the academy and begins treating influencers like universities with ring lights? Because this story is not only about one woman's resume, it's about how we decide whom to believe, who do we trust, and why. Hey, hello, what's up? It's your boy Anye Elite here at Icon City News. And just like a lot of you, I've had to be more than one thing in life. I started off as a gay rapper, just fighting to have my own voice. And that transitioned into being an entrepreneur, building platforms and opportunities for other folks from underrepresented communities. Now, as the author of Rainbow Soul, a chosen lineage of Black queer music memory and becoming, every chapter of this journey has taught me that the stories that shape our world also shape how we see ourselves. And thanks to all the incredible people that I met along the way, I also realized that those lessons aren't just for people who live and look like me. So, here on the commentary, we're going beyond the headlines. We're talking power, politics, music, entertainment, and what it all means for us. Welcome to the commentary on Icon City News, where our stories matter.
IconCityNews.com. IconCityNews.com.
Yes, no.
So, Dr. Bryant recently participated in that preparing for my Netflix documentary trend. You know the one, right? You sit down, people sit down, adjust themselves like the camera crew has finally arrived and prepared to tell their side of the scandal. But Dr. Bryant did hers wearing academic regalia, seated in front of a wall of framed degrees. Now, what do you think she expected to happen? Did she believe people would simply admire the decor and keep scrolling? Of course not. She knew that people would zoom in. She knew they would inspect the gown, people saying it came off of Amazon and was the wrong color. She knew they would study the diplomas, debate the fonts, and I don't know degrees that print the recipient's name in lowercase. And that's why I say she is trolling us. Not necessarily because the documents are fraudulent. I can't determine that from an image, and neither can most of the people posting with absolute certainty. But because she understands the symbol, she understands that the gown is not just clothing, the gown is argument. She, a person familiar with the entertainment industry, the degrees in the background are not just decorations, they're set pieces. They are the provocation. The post allows her to say, without saying it, that y'all are still talking about me, aren't you? And she's right, evidenced by what we're doing here today. We are. But does keeping the conversation alive answer the question? No. Does a clever post produce clarity? Does being funny about an allegation make the underlying concern less serious? Or does it simply convert controversy into content? Attention can extend a story, for sure, but it cannot verify it. I work in media, so I understand the strategy. When the public has already placed you in the middle of a conversation, there is power in refusing to disappear. You can ignore it and allow everyone else to define the story, or you can step directly into it, reshape it, and perhaps even profit from it. That in itself is not new. Public figures have always transformed scandals into visibility. The difference now is that the algorithm the algorithm rewards the person who keeps the tension alive. Every response becomes another headline. Every rebuttal sends people back to the original controversy. So let me ask you this. At what point does reclaiming the narrative become avoiding the answer? At what point does branding become deflection? And if a person publicly relies on an academic title to establish credibility, is it unreasonable for the public to ask what that title represents? I don't think it is. You cannot use an institution's authority when the authority strengthens your brand, then dismiss the institution's standards when people request verification. That does not mean the public is entitled to every private detail of your life, but there is a difference between privacy and professional transparency. And I understand that distinction. I understand it personally, honestly. I did not earnestly enter the academy until later in life. And even now, I remain very private about my academic journey. Why? I don't know. Because education can become strangely public. People do not simply ask what you are learning, they ask where you are enrolled, what degree are you pursuing, when will you finish. They're also going to ask you, why did you even wait? Or how far have you even gotten? And to be honest with you, underneath some of those questions is another question that they may not say out loud. And that is, when will your life become officially impressive? Have you ever felt that? Have you ever achieved something meaningful only to have people treat it like it did not fully count because it didn't come with the right institutional stamp? I've received some press coverage. I've produced events, developed platforms, worked with respected organizations, and to help create projects that have made a measurable difference. There is evidence of the impact. There are people who can speak to the work. So then there are communities and programs and relationships that exist because I participated in building them. So why should entering the academy later suddenly turn everything that came before it into preface? Why should a degree become the moment that my intelligence is finally declared legitimate? Why should it be the moment that your intelligence is finally declared legitimate? I reject that idea. My education matters to me. It can deepen my understanding, expose me to research, challenge my assumptions, and sharpen the work I'm already doing. But the academy did not introduce me to curiosity. It did not teach me to care about history. It certainly did not give me permission to think, write, organize, produce, or build. Those instincts were already alive. So yes, education can strengthen your capacity, but it should not be treated as the creator of your humanity. And I know that I'm not alone in this. How many people enter the academy later because they were raising children? That's a lot of people. How many were working full time? How many were surviving trauma? How many could not afford tuition at 18? How many were intellectually capable but attended schools that recognized their behavior before recognizing their brilliance? And How many people simply needed time to understand what they wanted, education to do for them? And so a nonlinear academic journey is not evidence of failure. It's not evidence of laziness. It's not evidence of intellectual inferiority. But, and this is important, it is also not permission to claim credentials that you haven't earned. Can we hold both truths? Can we hold both truths for a minute? Can we say degrees are not the only source of knowledge while still respecting what a degree is supposed to represent? Can we defend unconventional paths without erasing standards? Can we value lived experience without pretending experience automatically makes someone qualified to provide every kind of service? That is the nuance that this conversation demands but keeps losing. There is a difference between saying my journey did not follow a traditional timeline and publicly claiming a qualification that cannot be substantiated. There is a difference between being private about your education and using an academic title as part of your professional authority. There is also a difference between possessing wisdom and presenting yourself as clinically or academically trained. Those distinctions in themselves are not elite. They are necessary. So this brings up and brings us to a larger question. What do credentials actually tell us? Do they tell us that someone is intelligent? Not necessarily. Do they tell us someone has good judgment? I can tell you that history will tell you that's not the case. Do they tell us that someone is ethical? Unfortunately not. A credential tells us that at a minimum, a person is supposed to have completed a defined course of study under a particular institution's standards, which hopefully include provable learning objectives. And that matters, but it doesn't tell us everything. You can have several degrees and still lack discernment. You can have no degree and possess extraordinary insight. You can be highly educated and incapable of communicating with ordinary people. You can be self-taught and still misunderstand the limits of your knowledge. So perhaps the question should not be, does this person have a degree? Perhaps the better questions are, what do they know? How did they come to know it precisely? And what evidence supports what they are saying? Are they open to being questioned? What evidence supports what they're saying? And are they honest about the boundaries of their expertise? Those questions apply to everyone. They apply to the professor. They apply to the pastor. They apply to the life coach. They apply to the influencer. They apply to the journalist. They apply to you, me, and Cheyenne Bryant. What do you know? How do you know it? And so that is why Dr. Shante Holly's discussion about literacy becoming a class divide resonated with me, causing divides even at the familial level. And her work is impressive, not because I'm impressed by the title before her name, but because the idea resonated with me because literacy is becoming much more than whether a person can read a sentence. It's about, can you interpret the sentence? Can you identify what has been left out? Can you distinguish evidence from emotion? Can you recognize when someone is using confidence to conceal a weak argument? Can you hear something that confirms what you already believe and still ask whether it's true? Because that is literacy, boo. We live in a time when people can access more information than any previous generation, yet many of us are just becoming less patient with context. We want the clip. We want the quote. We want the villain. We want the answer before we have finished even understanding the question. And so, what happens when the person speaking sounds authoritative? What happens when they have a polished set, a strong personal brand, and millions of followers? Do we examine the argument, or do we assume that the size of the audience proves the quality of the information? Despite what you may think, popularity is not peer review. A platform is not a credential. Confidence is not competence. And relatability is not the same thing as expertise. But at the same time, credentials are not a substitute for intellectual curiosity either. What good is a doctorate if the person holding it cannot explain their work without making everyone else feel stupid? What good is expertise if it remains trapped inside journals, conferences, and classrooms that the wider communities can't access? And what happens when academics become so disconnected from the public that people decide the influencer is the only one speaking their language? And so that is where this story becomes institutional and where it is in conversation with my first book, Rainbow Soul. For the last 5 years, I've produced an event that brings thought leaders from across the country to Palm Springs. Some of those speakers do, a lot of them hold doctorates. Many do not. Some have developed their knowledge through research and formal education for sure, but others have developed it through organizing, ministry, entrepreneurship, advocacy, creative practice, or lived experience. Do I believe the person with the most degrees always has the most valuable contribution? I don't. Do I believe that every personal story automatically qualifies somebody as an expert? Also, I do not. The responsibility is to, I think, build a room where ideas can be heard and examined, not worshiped. And that's the goal with at least any of the events that I'm a part of, examined. Is the argument useful? Is it supported? Can it survive interrogation? Does it help people understand something more clearly? Can it be applied reasonably? That is the difference between producing a conversation and merely producing a stage. You know, like I said, with the events that I'm involved in, I don't want people to leave an event simply feeling impressed. I want them to leave more capable, more curious, more discerning, because inspiration without substance generally expires very quickly. And so that is part of my concern with what happens after controversies like this one. What if Dr. Bryant introduced some people to conversations about emotional wellness, relationship, or self-reflection that they may have not otherwise encountered? Do we pretend that contribution never occurred? Do we declare every useful idea worthless because the messenger's credentials are being questioned? I don't think that's intellectually honest either. Sometimes the person who introduces you to an idea is not the person qualified to guide you through the entire process. Sometimes the person who opens the door is not the person who should lead you through the whole building. But opening the door does not give you ownership of every room inside it. And helping someone begin a conversation does not entitle you to misrepresent your qualifications. So can we appreciate what was useful and still ask for honesty? Can we acknowledge impact without abandoning accountability? Can we avoid turning the person into either a flawless savior or a completely worthless fraud? I believe that is what critical thinking requires of us. It requires us to resist easy categories. But like I said, impact does not cancel accountability. The public deserves clarity. What credentials were earned? Where was it earned? What professional services is this person qualified to provide? Where does their expertise end? Those in themselves are not hateful questions. Those are not elitist questions. Those are questions that people should ask before placing their emotional health, money, or trust into someone else's hands. But accountability should not become humiliation. Do we want the truth, or do we simply want a spectacle? Do we want a transparent answer, or do we want a public execution that can keep us entertained for a week? Because there is a difference. The goal should not be to destroy someone because the internet has selected its latest target. I believe the goal should be to establish what is true, protect the public, and allow the person involved to respond honestly. Anything beyond that may be theater, and what Cheyenne is doing right now is theater. But throughout all of this, my deepest concern is what happens when these types of scandals weaken public trust in the institutions behind it. The Black church once held enormous institutional authority. It was not simply where people worshiped. It was where we organized, developed leaders, raised money, distributed information, preserved community memory, and built political movements. But what happened when parts of the church demanded trust without accountability? What happened when Black women asked difficult questions? What happened when Black queer people asked whether the institution had room for our full humanity? I think you know. I think you know what happened when leaders treated criticism as disobedience. Trust began to erode. Some of that erosion came through external attacks, but a great deal of it came through dogmatism. Some came through hypocrisy, and some came because institutions refused to answer legitimate questions while still demanding unquestioned loyalty. I don't want the Black Academy to become the next domino to fall. We know an educated voter population is important. So what happens if Black communities begin viewing every scholar as elitist? What happens if every university is viewed as a scam? What happens if people conclude that training, research, and professional standards are meaningless? The need for knowledge does not disappear. The need for healing certainly won't disappear. And the need for guidance does not disappear. The vacuum simply gets filled by somebody else, usually the loudest, wrongest person, usually the most charismatic person, usually the person with the best lighting and the most confident delivery. And when institutions lose trust, personalities take their place. We have started asking AI and individual personalities to perform the work that functioning institutions should be doing. One AI agent or person is expected to be therapist, professor, pastor, political analyst, relationship expert, and spiritual advisor. Then we become shocked when their training does not match the size of their platform. But can we blame the public entirely? Where was the academy? Was it accessible? Was it communicating clearly? Was it building relationships with the communities it studied? Was it translating research into language that people could actually use? Or was it too busy rewarding people for writing messages to one another? The academy cannot respond to this moment by saying, we have the credentials, so everyone else should just be quiet. That won't work. That type of attitude will only deepen the distrust. Academia has to respect lived experience. Community leaders have to respect evidence. Experts have to learn how to communicate without condescension. And people with powerful personal stories also have to recognize that surviving something does not automatically make them qualified to treat it. I lived through it and I studied it should not be enemies. Why can they not strengthen one another? Why can the researcher not learn from the person living the reality? Why can the community leader not recognize when trained expertise is required? Why must every conversation become a contest over whose knowledge counts? We need rigor and humanity. We need evidence and experience. We need people who know what they know and know what they don't, basically. Okay. I think that's what it's all about. Hey. But no, seriously. So let's return to the questions we began with, right? First, why would Dr. Cheyenne Bryant revive the controversy? Easy, because attention is currency and reclaiming the narrative can be a powerful media strategy. But attention is not verification. Second, does a person need a degree to possess wisdom or make an impact? I would say no. My own life tells me that intellectual curiosity, leadership, and meaningful work do not begin the day an institution validates you, but rejecting educational elitism does not require us to erase professional standards. Third, what should we use to determine credibility? And I would say not titles alone, not followers, not confidence. Those things are great, but we should ask what someone knows, how they know it, what evidence supports it, and whether they are honest about the limits of their expertise. And finally, what is at stake? What is at stake, institute? And that is trust. Trust in educators, trust in researchers, trust in therapists, trust in community leaders, trust in Black institutions themselves. Because when the public loses faith in the institution, it doesn't stop simply needing guidance. It simply starts searching for guidance somewhere else. And yes, Dr. Bryant may be trolling us. She's definitely trolling us. But are we curious enough to look past the troll? Are we disciplined enough to demand clarity without indulging cruelty? Are we mature enough to value education without turning it into a caste system? And are our institutions strong enough to earn the trust they keep asking the public to give them? That is the conversation, not just whether she got that gown from Amazon, not whether a diploma has a suspicious font, not whether somebody won the comment section. Okay. Though them comment sections be good. The larger question is whether we can build a culture where wisdom, evidence, experience, and accountability can exist in the same room. Because our communities need more than impressive personalities. We need people who can tell the truth. We need people who can verify what they claim. And we need institutions capable of holding our brilliance without demanding that we lie about ourselves to be respected. When trust collapses, it rarely takes down one person. Eventually, it threatens the entire building. Eventually, it threatens the entire collective. So, before I go, I just want to say, in my book, Rainbow Soul, it explores the difference between visibility and power and what it takes to build institutions capable of holding, in its case, Black queer memory, creativity, and truth. The book arrives August 31st and it's available for pre-order on iconcitynews.com.
iconcitynews.com. iconcitynews.com.
Yes, Lord.
Okay, so I know this gets said a lot, right? But if you like this content or you're getting anything from it or you support independent journalism, then
hit the subscribe button. Not only do I appreciate it and does it add to my passion to keep doing these type of stories, but it also helps increase the quality. So subscribe. And if you really want to make my day, visit iconcitynews.com and subscribe there.